Schopenhauer's perspective on women is unsettling, not because it's filled with hatred, but because it's rooted in unflinching honesty. For nearly 2 centuries, his words have resonated, not due to their kindness, but because they touch on a raw nerve. Most people don't seek the truth. Instead, they yearn for the comfort of civility, the elegance of equality, and the safety of gentle conclusions. However, Schopenhauer wasn't interested in comfort. He was driven by a desire for clarity. His unvarnished views, particularly on women, have made him one of the most contentious philosophers in history. He didn't conceal his thoughts behind metaphors or romanticize gender. He wrote what he observed, and his observations disturbed him. If you dare to gaze through his lens, even briefly, you might find something equally disturbing, that some of his ideas still hold true today. Let's examine the foundation of his worldview. Schopenhauer saw life as a trap, a cycle of suffering driven by an irrational force he termed the will. To him, the will is not reason, spirit, or morality, but blind, unrelenting desire. The will is hunger, sexual impulse, and the fight to exist, even when existence is painful. In this biological machinery of reproduction and survival, he believed women were not elevated beings, but strategic instruments of nature, designed to perpetuate the species, not pursue truth. Schopenhauer didn't view the feminine nature as evil. It was pragmatic. He wrote, "Women are by nature intended to obey. They belong to the second class." This statement would be met with outrage today, but let's strive to understand. He didn't mean women are inferior because they are weak. He meant they are different because their value in the brutal logic of survival was never based on risk, power, or truth, but on preservation. He saw men as the agents of history, war, philosophy, and risk, and women as the anchors of life, reproduction, domesticity, and social cohesion. To him, this wasn't inequality, it was biology. Schopenhauer didn't believe in idealism, he believed in function. Once you strip away sentimentality and romanticize relationships, you begin to see the cold mechanics of desire, sex, and human selection. He saw that relationships are often built on exchange, not love, and attraction is based on utility, not soul. Seduction, loyalty, and emotional expression are evolutionary strategies, not spiritual forces. To Schopenhauer, this was especially true for women. He viewed femininity not as grace or beauty, but as manipulation refined through nature, not consciously or maliciously, but instinctively. Women, in his view, are not dishonest because they're flawed, but because evolution trained them to be. In a world where physical strength belongs to men, subtlety becomes power. He wrote, "Nature has armed woman more than man for the ensnaring of man's heart. She possesses the art of dissimulation, of cunning, of flattery, of graceful lying, in a word, of hypocrisy." This may seem brutal, but think deeper. He wasn't describing evil. He was describing a survival adaptation in a male-dominated, resource-based world. A woman's success didn't come from confrontation, but from influence. And influence doesn't come through force. It comes through charm, emotion, and illusion. Most men are victims of this illusion, falling in love not with women, but with an idea they've been sold. He saw marriage as a trap, romance as a biological lie, and loyalty as a fleeting illusion propped up by society, but constantly betrayed by instinct. Men are enslaved by desire in women, not because they choose to be, but because they are designed to be. This truth disturbs people, as nature doesn't care about fairness, purity, loyalty, or moral equality. It cares about continuation. For Schopenhauer, this truth made women not sacred, but dangerous. As a man in love is not in control, he is possessed, sacrificing his logic for lust, his sovereignty for softness, and his focus for validation. All this for a moment of intimacy, the illusion of belonging, and the continuation of the species. Schopenhauer would laugh, not because he hated women, but because he pitied the man who thought he was in charge when, in reality, he was the one being controlled. He saw women as nature's weapon, not by fault but by design, and that design was working flawlessly. Much of what Schopenhauer said may feel bitter, one-sided, or like the ramblings of a man who was never truly loved. But he didn't pretend to be balanced. He wrote to reveal what nobody else dared to say, that behind the fantasy of love is biology, behind the sweetness of affection is instinct, and behind the beautiful face is strategy. This wasn't an insult to him. It was nature at work, perfect, inevitable, and brutal. His philosophy remains relevant today because the illusion still exists in movies, music, modern dating, and the way men trade their purpose for attention. Men still fall into the same trap, confusing attention for affection, validation for love, and giving their loyalty, money, and time to women who see them not as humans, but as opportunities. This isn't every woman, and it's not about hate, it's about awareness. Schopenhauer said men were blind, guided not by wisdom or self-control, but by illusion. The illusion that she really cares, that his devotion will be repaid, and that her loyalty is unconditional. He asked, is this love real, or is it just a biological transaction in disguise? In his essay on women, Schopenhauer claimed the fundamental fault of the female character is that it has no sense of justice. On the surface, this sounds brutal, but it means women are inherently pragmatic, making decisions based on utility, security, and immediate emotional benefit, not abstract ideas of fairness. This wasn't cruelty to him, it was design. If men didn't understand this, they would become slaves to an ideal that never truly existed. Consider a modern example. A man spends years chasing a woman, buying gifts, staying available, being nice, listening, and bending. Yet she chooses someone else, someone colder, more independent, and self-possessed. The man is left confused, heartbroken, and angry, telling himself the world is unfair, that women don't want good men. But Schopenhauer would say, you weren't good, you were predictable, obedient, and emotionally cheap. You gave away your power, and nature punishes that. Schopenhauer understood this psychological tension long before modern psychology. He saw that what most men call love is just dependency in disguise, a craving for validation, a need to be accepted, a hunger to be chosen, because deep down they don't accept themselves. Women are biologically wired to respond to strength, not submission. That's why Schopenhauer viewed female nature as opportunistic, not malicious, but responsive. Women choose based on instinct, and instinct favors the man who signals strength, resources, and detachment. This is why most men fail. They give too much, expect too much, love too quickly, and lose themselves in the process. And the disturbing part is that they think this is virtue. But nature doesn't reward virtue. It rewards strategy. In this game, Schopenhauer believed most men are losing. He also wrote that men romanticize women out of lust, not logic, placing them on pedestals and imagining their purity, kindness, and moral superiority when, in fact, they are projecting. If men saw women clearly, without lust, fantasy, or hope, they would realize how much they've given away, that they were never in love with women, but with the idea of being loved back. This is the disturbing truth Schopenhauer tried to expose. Most of what we call love is an illusion wrapped in biology. This still matters today because men are being broken by this illusion, sacrificing purpose for connection, choosing comfort over sovereignty, and tolerating disrespect for closeness. When it falls apart and she leaves or loses interest, they call her heartless. But Schopenhauer would say, she isn't heartless. You were just never seen as valuable in the first place. The man who sacrifices everything to please loses what made him worthy. He trades respect for attention, clarity for chaos, and depth for approval. The worst part is that he believes this is what love is supposed to be. But it's not. Love in its purest form must come from strength, not survival. Schopenhauer offers a bitter but useful gift, not a guide to relationships or a recipe for dating, but a reality check for men who are still asleep. A reminder that women are not your salvation, attraction is not owed, and romance is not a contract. It's a game of instinct, projection, and power. Unless you master yourself, you will keep giving away your power. What happens when a man finally sees clearly and stops living at the mercy of the illusion? Schopenhauer's philosophy on women is disturbing, not because it attacks women, but because it forces men to look at themselves, question their desires, and questioned everything they were told would bring happiness. Most men were never told the truth. They were told to be providers, kind, and sacrificing, and that would bring love, loyalty, and peace. But when they did all that, they were left confused, exhausted, and alone. Because no one told them that they are valued not for what they give, but for what they withhold, and that the moment they become emotionally dependent, they lose the power that makes them attractive. This isn't just about dating or gender games. It's about truth and waking up from the illusion that has broken more men than anything else. The belief that your worth is determined by how much you please others. Schopenhauer didn't hate women. He understood how men destroy themselves for them. His philosophy is hard to accept because it's not about women, it's about you. The longer you deny this, the longer you chase the fantasy, and the more disconnected you become from the only thing that can set you free, your own mind. He believed that until a man breaks the spell of illusion, until he sees love, sex, and affection not as salvation, but as traps, he will never become free. He wrote, "Marrying means to have one's rights and double one's duties." He saw how men were expected to give endlessly without equivalent return, how society trained them to feel responsible for female happiness and to define their success through partnership instead of inner peace. He rejected all this because, to him, no truth was worth sacrificing your freedom, and no affection was worth surrendering your soul. This requires something few are ready for: emotional independence, not detachment or coldness, but clarity. The kind of clarity that says, I will not chase what weakens me. I will not confuse attention with value. I will not lose myself just to be chosen. Because a man who needs to be chosen is a man who has already lost himself. Schopenhauer would rather you be alone than in relationships where you are disposable. Most men find themselves exhausted, confused, and unfulfilled, doing everything right but being replaced by the man who doesn't care. They ask, why? Schopenhauer would answer, because you became easy, because you turned your love into obligation, because you gave everything and left nothing to be earned, because you didn't understand the simple truth of power. What is always available is rarely respected. You don't get respect from giving, you get it from not needing, from being centered, grounded, and complete with or without her. That's what women actually respond to, what society fears, and what Schopenhauer wanted you to see. Once you understand this, everything changes. You stop chasing, performing, and begging for love from people who don't love themselves. You stop entering situations that drain your soul and negotiating your peace for the illusion of connection. In that silence, you find something you were never told to look for: sovereignty, the ability to exist without emotional dependence, the courage to walk away without explanation, the confidence to say no without guilt, and the wisdom to let go even when your heart is still attached. Because Schopenhauer didn't offer hope. He offered freedom, not the freedom to control others, but the freedom to never be controlled again. When you reach that point, when you no longer seek permission to exist, when you no longer sacrifice your identity to be loved, and when you no longer fear being misunderstood, you become dangerous. Not because you hurt others, but because no one can use you anymore. No one can weaponize your kindness, exploit your weakness, or manipulate your emotions. You've stopped looking for fulfillment outside and started building it inside, in your mind, principles, and the parts of you that no longer seek approval. That's what Schopenhauer wanted you to understand, that the pain you feel isn't from women, but from your own unexamined hunger to be loved. Once you heal that, once you see the game for what it is, you win by not playing it. You move differently, speak less, and expect nothing. Not because you're bitter, but because you're finally awake. Now you see that most people don't want love. They want attention, comfort, and escape. But you're done escaping, because this is the end of illusion and the beginning of truth.